dealing with the Stantec Consulting Services. Mr. Stark.
Yes, thank you. At last month's meeting, the HRA was presented with a proposal from Stantec Consulting Services to conduct a rental housing study to better understand the Richfield rental property market and subsequently the areas of need in the rental housing stock. The HRA requested additional information be submitted, and the item was tabled until tonight's meeting. At the HRA's request, the consultant submitted a revised proposal that included an initial work session with the HRA, more information about the city's housing composition and how it compares to that of other similar communities in the area, specific review of the Met Council's requirements for Richfield. With these clarifications, the primary goals of the inventory and needs assessment remain the same: to provide the HRA and staff with current data on the city's rental housing supply, to provide information about the broader rental housing market, and to inform the HRA's response to rental housing development proposals. These revisions did increase the proposal by $500 to a total of $24,750. And I would just add that some of the things that you talked about aren't necessarily in the staff report, but were conveyed to Stantec, such as we weren't really looking for the traditional market study that only tells us what the market wants, but that reflects what we as a community want. And so I would mention that Jay Dema is here from Stantec tonight, who could answer any questions you might have, and staff could answer any as well. Thank you.
All right. Did anybody have any questions they wanted to ask?
It was Steve and I always do. Go ahead, Steve. You go first.
Perhaps you'd like to come up and I could ask you.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you very much for letting me be here. So,
I just wanted to ask you, we had quite a discussion at our last meeting, and then we laid it on the staff to convey to you what it was that we still wanted to modify. And I wondered if you could just explain to me or let me know what you understand our concerns were from the previous one and what the changes are.
Specifically with respect to the not necessarily having a market study per se, but versus an actual sort of inventory of what's in the community today and what might be needed. I think my understanding of that would be, and I fully respect what Mr. Stark mentioned, that a market study is probably predicated on this notion of what the demand factors that are out there in the marketplace that are being driven by demographic change and economic change vis-a-vis what actually exists in the marketplace. What is your sort of supply or inventory of housing? And it's that interaction, that interplay between those two forces where the market's kind of dictating, what might be in greater demand versus, other types. And that could be based on price, could be based on type of unit, could be based on ownership or rental or other functions. But as I understand, I think the city of Richfield really wants to be able to really understand what's in the community today with respect to the actual housing stock and the rental housing stock in particular with this study. How many buildings are out there? How big are they? What types of units are actually in them? What kind of prices are being charged for rent in those units? And then understanding who a little bit is the occupiers of those units. What kind of characteristics and demographic and socioeconomic profile are there. I think it's always probably important to understand if there's a gap in that area, which is getting a little bit at the notion of kind of the market. But we know there's a lot of housing needs that aren't always met by the free hand of the market, as they say, and there needs to be some sort of intervention to make sure that we can get housing and shelter be available to as many people as we possibly can. So it's important to kind of look at those other aspects. So I hope Hopefully that answers.
Thank you. I think that's getting at it. I think a concern many of us have is as we decide what we want to invest in as a community, one of our goals is to have a diversity of housing. And typically, Richfield has found itself having a lot of smaller houses, older apartments, smaller apartments, so that my suspicion is that we have a plenitude of lower income housing. And what we need from the study is the ability to look at how different levels of housing and amenities compare in ratio to each other in the community, so we can see where we're lacking. And to me, that's what we're looking at in terms of needs in the community, not needs as required by a market, but rather needs as required by providing a full spectrum of housing opportunities in a community.
Yeah, and that's really something that I've done a number of housing analyses over the years for communities and in counties and in other similar jurisdictions. And, as important as that component is to kind of understand what the marketplace is and what the marketplace is kind of giving that feedback, it really is, I might characterize it as kind of a gaps analysis is really what the communities generally need. And that is, in the case of, take, for example, senior housing. Coincidentally, back in the mid-'90s when I worked for a previous firm, I actually did a big senior housing analysis for the city of Richfield. And it was, that's something where there's been a lot of diversification and change of senior housing, products, and it's continuously evolving. And with the new development and advent of assisted living environments as well as memory care environments, that's a kind of a further continuation or continuum of the senior housing products that are out there to really, meet the needs of, one might say, the marketplace, but one might just simply say just kind of changing demographics and kind of cultural lifestyles. And that's, I fully understand in respect that trying to take that look to understand, is there perhaps an appropriate continuum of options in the community? And that's certainly something that would be the primary, sort of result out of going through the analysis.
Thank you.
Any other questions here?
I'd like to expand on that because I'm not sure I agree with just everything just about that. And that's why we're having this study session, because we all have some ideas about this. Yeah. One of the things that I think is a real concern here is that we keep hearing that we need to have affordable and workforce housing and all these levels of housing. And it's always, well, we think we have about this percent, or we think we have about that percent. We don't know what we have. We don't know what we have. Mm-hmm. We'd like to really know what the expectations are of the Met Council and how far have we gone to meet it, and have we surpassed it. A lot of people kind of have this idea that we're very affordable, especially compared to some of our neighbors around here, and that maybe, when we look at the demographic and what we want to do, could we provide more? Is there a market for it? Yes, there is. We don't have to do a market study to say we need more workforce housing, because we know it's there. Mm-hmm. Okay. Everybody can do it, and people would move in. The idea, though, is that when you talk about the expansion of that, we have a lot of the smaller homes, as Commissioner Quam talked about. What about, where's the gap that we're not filling for some of those new families who want to stay in Richfield? How do we keep that demographic in here? What are they looking for? What kinds of housing opportunity are they looking for? Are some of our people wanting to not look at all these one bedrooms? Do we need 2 and 3 bedrooms? Mm-hmm. And what size and what limitations, and does that move up to what? And where will we put those? And what would that mean to Richfield? When you talk about diversity, we talk about diversity of people, but we also talk about diversity of income. Mm-hmm. So, and we've done a lot of senior products already. But how do we keep that middle class, middle aged folks, unfortunately like us, or a little younger families? How do we keep them here? And what kind of housing product do we need for them? Those are some of the things I'd like to see as well, besides what was discussed.
Yeah, and I think as part of this process and in the request in revising the proposal is to to kick this off and to sit down with the HRA board, as well as eventually getting staff involved too, to really make clear on what are the questions that we really want to answer out of the analysis, and be clear about that process. And as you're talking, it's reminding me that there's a life cycle that we all go through, and that are generally we try to have our housing needs sort of shift and change throughout our life cycle. And it's certainly important for communities to recognize, to have that diversity of housing choice to keep people in the communities. We've seen this in other places in the metro area where communities just didn't offer up the diversity of housing choices, that as they developed, aged, children grew up, started to move out of the house, there weren't the options for them to stay in the communities. So that's just an example of the ability to kind of keep and lower sort of turnover in the community, try to keep people, roots, planted, particularly when we're running into situations where people they want to stay in a community, but there isn't the choices there for them. So trying to understand and target, which of these, where we might feel that there's the gaps, in the housing supply that's out there, and perhaps try to, come up with strategies to fill those gaps.
And then I just have a bit of a concern if we just compare ourselves to like a St. Louis Park. They have the same housing stock we have. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to see what other communities are doing too outside of that realm, to see what they offer and what families, because we're losing families to suburbs because we don't have some of that housing stock. People have left here. I know that to be the case. So if we look at how much do we have compared to others, so that gives us an idea of maybe what we want to do when we look at some of our redevelopment projects.
Yes, yeah, certainly. And one of the things I would mention that to keep in the back of our minds in going through this analysis is some of the changes that are happening in the economy to sort of influence the types of housing choices that people are making today. I mean, it used to be, that the traditional, life cycle housing choice was you rent an apartment when you were younger, you built up a little equity, you perhaps met a partner, you wanted to then buy housing, start a family, and that was sort of this traditional cycle. It's with what we've gone through the recession, it's really beginning to kind of change some of those rules. And admittedly, I don't think it's entirely clear as to what's going to happen with respect to that. But I think there's starting to be evidence and data that we're starting to see that folks are maybe delaying the purchase of a home and stay in rental housing by choice. And again, that's something that we would just need to keep in mind.
That'd be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of my comments would be that I know that Bloomington is in the process of building 4 upscale market rental units just south of the 494, and we can't seem to attract one. Yeah. We have one that's the first one that we have that's going to be an improvement will be the one on Lyndale. But we seem to not be meeting the full spectrum of potentials out there. So
and it'd be nice to know what those barriers are.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Madam, I would make a motion, Madam Chair,
Yes.
to authorize the staff to execute a contract with Stantec Consulting Services to conduct a rental housing inventory and needs assessment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay.
Thank you very much. I
Thanks
look
for
forward to
coming.
working with yourselves and staff on this
Thank
project.
you.
It's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, next item, any HRA discussion